Arthur Moreau, once a celebrated professor of philosophy, sat at his modest wooden desk in his cozy Brighthaven home. The sea breeze ruffled the curtain by the open window, carrying with it the faint sound of children's laughter from a distant playground. Yet Arthur's thoughts were far from lighthearted. His eyes lingered on a single photograph on his desk, a picture of him and his late wife, Eleanor, smiling in a park surrounded by books and their shared dreams. Their dream of starting a family had never come to fruition, leaving a quiet ache in his heart. That ache brought Arthur to this moment. At 70 years old, he was sitting across from the stern-faced director of the Brighthaven orphanage, a drab building he had passed countless times without much thought. The director's office smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the hum of fluorescent lights added to the oppressive atmosphere. "You do realize this is unusual?" the director, Ms. Harper, asked, narrowing her eyes. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "You're retired, Mr. Moreau. Why would you want to adopt, especially a child with," she hesitated, lowering her voice as though the walls might listen, "special needs?" Arthur didn't flinch. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Harper. But I've thought about this long and hard. Children like Mila need a chance. I'm not here to pity her, I'm here to give her the life she deserves." Ms. Harper sighed and glanced at the file in front of her. "Mila is 7. She has Down syndrome. She's been in and out of foster homes because, well," she trailed off, unsure how to articulate the rejection the child had faced. "People struggle to see her potential." Arthur's expression softened, but his voice held firm. "Then it's about time someone did." Ms. Harper frowned. "You're aware of the challenges, of course? I've spent my entire career encouraging students to embrace critical thinking and empathy. I'm not naive, Ms. Harper. I know it won't be easy," Arthur said. "But Mila deserves someone who won't give up on her." Ms. Harper studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. You'll need to undergo the formal procedures, but given Mila's history, I think you're exactly what she needs." The following week, Arthur returned to the orphanage to meet Mila. She was seated at a small table by the window, a crayon in her hand and a worn coloring book before her. She didn't look up when Arthur entered, her focus entirely on filling the sky with broad streaks of green instead of blue. "Hello, Mila," Arthur said gently, kneeling to her eye level. She glanced at him briefly, her dark eyes cautious but curious. "Hi," she murmured before returning to her coloring. Arthur smiled. "Green skies. I like it. Creative?" Mila paused, her hand hovering over the page. "It's different," she said simply, shrugging. "That it is," Arthur agreed. "Sometimes being different is the best thing of all." She looked at him then, her head tilted slightly as though trying to decipher his intentions. "You're different too." Arthur chuckled softly. "I suppose I am." In that moment something shifted. The walls Mila had built to protect herself seemed to lower just a fraction. It wasn't love at first sight, it was something quieter, something tentative. But it was a beginning. The process was neither quick nor simple. There were home visits, interviews, and endless forms to fill out. Through it all, Arthur remained steadfast, even as whispers began to spread through the small town. People questioned his decision, their skepticism veiled under the guise of concern. "Arthur, are you sure about this?" his old friend and neighbor Marjorie asked one evening as they sat on his porch. "A child with her challenges? It's a lot for anyone, let alone someone your age." Arthur sipped his tea and gazed at the sea. "Mila doesn't need perfection, Marjorie. She needs someone to believe in her." When the final approval came, Arthur drove to the orphanage with a quiet determination. Mila was waiting for him by the door, a small suitcase in hand and a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Ready, Mila?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Okay." The drive home was silent, save for the occasional hum of the car engine. When they arrived, Arthur carried her suitcase inside and gave her a tour of the house. Mila's eyes widened when she saw the small room he had prepared for her, the walls adorned with pictures of nature and shelves filled with books and art supplies. "This is mine?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's yours," Arthur replied. "All yours." Mila walked to the window where the view overlooked the sea. For the first time since Arthur had met her, she smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. Arthur watched her and felt a surge of hope. This was only the beginning, but in that moment he knew they had both taken the first step on a transformative journey. The morning light poured through the window of Mila's new bedroom, painting the walls in warm shades of gold. Arthur stood in the doorway, watching her take careful steps around the room. Her small hands touched the edges of the bookshelf, then the patterned quilt on her bed, and finally the framed photograph of a calm rolling sea he had hung above her desk. "Do you like it?" Arthur asked, breaking the silence. Mila looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "It's big," Arthur chuckled. "It is, isn't it? It'll feel smaller once you fill it with your things." She nodded slowly and returned to the quilt, her fingers tracing the fabric. Arthur noticed her stuffed rabbit perched neatly on the pillow and made a mental note to give her time. The transition from the orphanage to his home was monumental for both of them, but he was determined to make it as smooth as possible. "Come downstairs when you're ready," Arthur said gently. "I'll make pancakes." At the mention of pancakes, Mila's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Over the following days, Arthur and Mila began to establish a rhythm. She was quiet, often retreating to her room or sitting by the window to watch the waves. Arthur didn't push her to open up, allowing her to settle at her own pace. He noticed her gravitate toward the crayons and blank paper he had provided, often spending hours creating colorful, abstract images. One afternoon, Arthur found her in the kitchen, carefully drawing swirls of red and blue on a scrap of paper. She glanced up when he entered, her hands pausing mid-stroke. "Is this okay?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course, Mila," Arthur replied, pulling up a chair beside her. "What are you drawing?" She tilted her head, examining her work. "It's a sky. But not like outside." Arthur studied the vibrant shapes. "I see. A sky you imagine?" Mila nodded. "Sometimes the real one feels too far." Her words struck Arthur, their depth surprising him. "It's beautiful, Mila. You have quite the imagination." She offered a small smile, and for the first time, Arthur felt a bridge forming between them. Their routines were occasionally interrupted by visits from well-meaning but skeptical neighbors. Marjorie, ever curious, dropped by one afternoon with a basket of muffins. Mila was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by her drawings. "Well, hello there, Mila," Marjorie said brightly. "What are you working on?" Mila looked up at her briefly but didn't respond, returning to her artwork. "She's still adjusting," Arthur said, ushering Marjorie into the kitchen. "You know how it is." "I just worry, Arthur," Marjorie said in a hushed voice, handing him the basket. "Raising a child like her isn't easy. And at your age." Arthur held up a hand. "She's not a child like her, Marjorie. She's just a child. And I appreciate your concern, but Mila and I will manage just fine." Marjorie pursed her lips but didn't argue further. As she left, she cast one last glance at Mila, who was now meticulously sorting her crayons by color. The first real test came when Arthur decided to take Mila to the local grocery store. She had been hesitant, clinging to his hand as they walked through the aisles. Whispers followed them, subtle but sharp. "Isn't that Arthur Moreau? And that girl? I heard he adopted her. She has, you know." Mila's grip on Arthur's hand tightened. He leaned down to her level and said softly, "Don't worry about them, Mila. People say silly things when they don't understand." She nodded but didn't let go until they were safely back in the car. Arthur's heart ached at the fear in her eyes, but he resolved to shield her from as much as he could while teaching her to stand strong. One evening, Mila wandered into Arthur's study, where he was surrounded by stacks of books and papers. She hesitated at the doorway, holding one of her drawings. "Can I show you something?" she asked. Arthur set his book aside and gestured for her to come in. "Of course, Mila. What do you have?" She handed him the drawing. It was a colorful swirl of shapes, with a small figure standing in the center. Arthur examined it closely. "Tell me about this one," he said. "It's me," Mila explained, pointing to the figure. "And that's all the people talking around me." Arthur noticed that the figure was surrounded by darker shades, while the outer edges were bright and warm. "And the colors?" "The dark ones are when people stare too much," Mila said quietly. "The bright ones are when they're nice." Arthur swallowed the lump in his throat and placed the drawing carefully on his desk. "Mila, this is incredible. You're able to show so much through your art. It's a gift?" "Gift?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes," Arthur said firmly. "A very special one." For the first time, Mila's smile reached her eyes. In the weeks that followed, Mila began to grow more comfortable in her new home. She would peek into the kitchen while Arthur cooked, ask him questions about the books on his shelves, and even laugh at his jokes, though her laughter was soft like the sound of the waves outside. Arthur knew they still had a long journey ahead, but as he watched Mila begin to blossom, he felt the weight of his decision lighten. They were building something together, something neither of them had known they needed. The morning sun spilled into the kitchen as Arthur placed a plate of toast and scrambled eggs in front of Mila. She was sitting at the table, her backpack resting against the chair. Today was her first day at Brighthaven Primary School, a milestone that filled Arthur with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Are you ready, Mila?" he asked, sitting across from her. She nodded slowly, poking at her eggs with her fork. "Will the other kids be nice?" Arthur paused. He had thought about this question, about how he could shield her from the inevitable harshness of the world. But Mila was perceptive. She would know if he offered false assurances. "I hope they will," Arthur said honestly. "But if they're not, you tell me. And remember, Mila, being kind and true to yourself is always the most important thing." Mila nodded again, though her face betrayed her uncertainty. At the school gates, Arthur knelt to Mila's level. The children running around and parents chatting created a bustling scene. Mila clung to the strap of her backpack, her gaze darting nervously. "You're going to be great," Arthur said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And I'll be right here at the end of the day to hear all about it." "Okay," Mila whispered, taking a deep breath. With that, she joined the small stream of children heading into the building. Arthur watched until she disappeared, his heart heavy with hope and worry. The day did not unfold smoothly for Mila. In the classroom, she was seated near the back, away from the chattier groups. When the teacher introduced her, some children exchanged glances and muffled giggles. At recess, Mila wandered the playground, her stuffed rabbit safely tucked in her backpack. She approached a group of girls playing hopscotch. "Can I play?" she asked hesitantly. One of the girls, a tall brunette with pigtails, scrunched her nose. "Do you even know how?" Mila nodded. "I think so." "Well, we're full," the girl replied curtly, turning back to her game. Mila stepped back, her shoulders sagging. She spent the rest of recess sitting under a tree watching the other children play. Arthur could see Mila's downcast expression as she climbed into the car at the end of the day. "How was it?" he asked gently. Mila shrugged, looking out the window. "It was okay." Arthur didn't press her, but that evening, while she worked on a drawing in the living room, he joined her. "You can tell me anything, Mila," he said softly. "Even the hard things." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "The kids don't like me. They laughed when I tried to play." Arthur's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, Mila. Some people are quick to judge what they don't understand. But you're strong and you'll find the right friends. It might just take time." Mila nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. The following day, something unexpected happened. During recess, Mila was once again sitting under the tree when a boy with unruly blonde hair and a crooked grin approached her. "Hey," he said, holding out a juice box. "I'm Leo. Want some?" Mila hesitated, then accepted the juice. "Thanks." Leo plopped down beside her, crossing his legs. "Why don't you play with the other kids?" "They don't want me to," Mila replied quietly. They're boring anyway," Leo said with a shrug. "Want to see something cool?" Before Mila could respond, Leo pulled out a stack of playing cards from his pocket. He fanned them out and performed a clumsy but enthusiastic magic trick, making Mila giggle for the first time that day. "You're funny," Mila said. "I know," Leo replied with a mock-serious face. "Stick with me and I'll show you all my tricks." For the rest of recess, Leo kept Mila company, and for the first time she didn't feel so alone. Arthur noticed the change when Mila came home that afternoon. She was still quiet, but there was a spark in her eyes. "Did something good happen today?" he asked as they ate dinner. "I made a friend," Mila said, a small smile playing on her lips. "His name's Leo. He's nice." Arthur's relief was palpable. "That's wonderful, Mila. Tell me about him." Mila described Leo's magic tricks and how he had sat with her under the tree. As she spoke, Arthur realized how crucial this budding friendship was for her confidence. Over the next weeks, Leo became Mila's steadfast companion. He defended her when other kids made cruel remarks and encouraged her to join in activities, even when she was hesitant. His kindness made a world of difference, but it didn't erase the challenges entirely. One afternoon, Mila returned home with a crumpled drawing in her hand. Arthur noticed her swollen eyes and sat beside her on the couch. "What happened?" he asked softly. "They called me names," Mila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Said I don't belong." Arthur took a deep breath, his emotions threatening to boil over. "Mila, listen to me. Those words don't define you. What matters is what you believe about yourself, and I know you're brave, smart, and full of potential." Mila nodded, though her tears didn't stop. Arthur decided it was time to take action. The next day, Arthur arranged a meeting with Mila's teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, to address the bullying. While the teacher seemed sympathetic, her response lacked urgency. "Children can be cruel, Mr. Moreau," she said. "But Mila will have to learn to adapt." Arthur's calm demeanor hardened. It's not Mila's job to adapt to cruelty, Mrs. Caldwell. It's the school's job to create an environment where all children feel safe. Mrs. Caldwell promised to address the matter, though Arthur could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, he refused to let the issue go unnoticed. Despite the hurdles, Mila's resilience grew. With Leo by her side and Arthur's unwavering support, she began to find her voice. During art class one day, she surprised everyone by presenting a vivid painting of a group of children holding hands under a swirling, colorful sky. "It's called Friends," Mila explained to the class. "Because everyone should have one." The room fell silent, and for a moment even the children who had teased her seemed to see her in a new light. Arthur framed the painting and hung it in the living room. It served as a reminder that even in the face of adversity, Mila was determined to shine. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt from the sea as Mila and Arthur walked to the small schoolyard where a community event was underway. Mila's painting, titled Friends, had been chosen to represent Brighthaven Primary School's message of inclusivity. It would be displayed at the town's cultural center, a milestone that filled Arthur with pride. "Do you think people will like it?" Mila asked, clutching Arthur's hand. "They'll love it," Arthur replied, his voice warm. "Just like I do." Mila smiled, but her free hand fidgeted with the hem of her dress, a nervous tic Arthur had come to recognize. They reached the display, where Mila's painting was prominently featured, surrounded by other students' work. Arthur noticed a small group of children standing nearby, including Leo, whose face lit up when he saw Mila. "Mila?" Leo waved enthusiastically, running over to her. "It looks awesome up there." Mila beamed. "Thanks, Leo." As they admired the painting together, Arthur couldn't help but notice the subtle whispers and side glances from other parents. He felt a pang of frustration but pushed it aside, focusing instead on Mila's growing confidence. That evening, as Arthur prepared dinner, Mila sat at the kitchen table, recounting the day's events with unusual animation. Her joy was infectious, but Arthur knew the journey ahead would still be filled with challenges. "Leo said he wants to learn to paint too," Mila said, her fork swirling through her mashed potatoes. "I told him I'd teach him." Arthur chuckled. "I think he'll be lucky to learn from the best." Mila grinned, but her face grew serious after a moment. "Some kids still don't like me though. They said my painting isn't as good as theirs." Arthur's expression softened. "What do you think, Mila?" She shrugged. "I think it's good. I like it." "Then that's what matters," Arthur said firmly. "Not everyone will see the beauty in what you do, but that doesn't make it any less valuable." Mila nodded slowly, her confidence returning. The challenges of school persisted, but Mila's resilience only grew. Leo remained her steadfast ally, often standing up for her when others tried to exclude her. One afternoon, after a particularly heated playground exchange, Leo approached Mila as she sat under their favorite tree. "Don't let them get to you, Mila," he said, flopping onto the grass beside her. "They're just mean because they don't know any better." Mila glanced at him. "Why are you nice to me?" Leo shrugged. "Because you're my friend. That's what friends do." Mila's eyes shimmered, and for the first time she hugged him, a gesture that caught Leo off guard but made him smile. Arthur decided it was time to channel Mila's growing confidence into something tangible. He began introducing her to books that celebrated differences, stories of people who overcame challenges to achieve greatness. One evening, as they sat in the living room, he handed her a book about a famous lawyer who had fought for social justice. "What's this?" Mila asked, flipping through the pages. "A story about someone who changed the world," Arthur said. "I think you'll like it." Mila began to read, her brow furrowed in concentration. Arthur watched as her eyes lit up with each page. "Do you think I could do that?" she asked suddenly, looking up. "Do what?" Arthur replied. "Help people. Like this lawyer," Mila said, her voice filled with wonder. Arthur smiled. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to, Mila." The idea of helping others took root in Mila's mind. During a class discussion about kindness, she raised her hand, a rare occurrence, and spoke confidently about how everyone deserved a chance to feel included. "Even if someone is different, it doesn't mean they're less important," Mila said. "Sometimes different is what makes them special." Her teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, nodded approvingly. "That's a beautiful thought, Mila. Thank you for sharing." The class fell silent, and for the first time, Mila felt the weight of her words. It was as though a door had opened, allowing her to step into a world where her voice mattered. At home, Arthur noticed Mila's newfound sense of purpose. She began to ask questions about fairness, about why some people were treated differently. Arthur did his best to answer, but he also encouraged her to think critically. "What do you think we can do to change things?" he asked one evening. Mila pondered the question, her gaze distant. "Maybe we can show people that different is good. Like how you said about my painting." Arthur nodded. "That's a start. And it begins with small actions, like being kind, standing up for others, and sharing your story." Mila's determination grew with each passing day. She started small, helping her classmates understand her perspective, and over time, her efforts began to make a difference. Even Mrs. Caldwell, once dismissive of Mila's struggles, started to see her potential. One day, Leo surprised Mila with a small, hand-drawn card. On the front was a stick figure holding a paintbrush, with the words "best friend ever" scrawled above it. "What's this for?" Mila asked, her cheeks turning pink. "Just because," Leo said, grinning. "You're the coolest person I know." Mila held the card tightly, her smile brighter than the morning sun. For the first time she felt truly seen, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone worthy of admiration and friendship. That night, Arthur found Mila sitting by her window, gazing at the stars. "What's on your mind, Mila?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Leo said I'm his best friend," Mila replied softly. "And today the teacher said I was brave for speaking up." Arthur smiled. "That's because you are brave, and kind, and talented. The world is better because you're in it, Mila." Mila leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "I think I want to help people when I grow up." Arthur's heart swelled with pride. "I have no doubt you will." As they sat together, the stars twinkling above them, Arthur felt a profound sense of hope. Mila was becoming an advocate in her own right, and he knew this was only the beginning of her extraordinary journey. The Brighthaven Community Art Exhibition buzzed with quiet excitement as residents milled around the gallery, admiring the array of paintings and sculptures on display. Arthur stood near the entrance, his heart swelling with pride as Mila's painting, Friends, took center stage in a large, well-lit corner. The vibrant piece drew more than a few intrigued glances from the crowd. Mila stood beside him, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "Do you think they like it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Arthur crouched down, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I don't just think so, Mila, I know they do." Her dark eyes scanned the room nervously until Leo bounded over, his face alight with enthusiasm. "Mila, everyone's looking at your painting. I heard one lady say it was her favorite." Mila's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. "Really? Really?" Leo said confidently. "Come on, I'll show you." He grabbed her hand and led her toward a group gathered near her painting. Arthur followed closely, observing how people lingered in front of the piece, discussing its colors and composition. "Such vibrant use of color," one woman said, tilting her head. "It's like she's captured a whole world in a single frame." Another man nodded. "You can feel the emotion, hope, resilience, connection. It's remarkable." Mila's eyes widened as she listened, a shy smile spreading across her face. Arthur gently squeezed her hand. "See? Your work is touching people's hearts." As the evening progressed, Mila's painting continued to draw attention. A local art enthusiast, Mrs. Sinclair, approached Arthur and Mila with an offer. "Mr. Moreau, Mila's work is extraordinary," Mrs. Sinclair said, her tone warm and sincere. "We'd love to feature her painting in our upcoming regional exhibition. It would give her a chance to showcase her talent to an even wider audience." Mila glanced up at Arthur, her expression a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "Can I do it?" Arthur knelt beside her. "Only if you want to, Mila. This is your decision." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I want to." Mrs. Sinclair beamed. "Wonderful. I'll be in touch with the details." As the evening drew to a close, Mila's confidence seemed to grow with every compliment she received. By the time they left the gallery, she was clutching Leo's hand and chatting animatedly about the exhibition, a far cry from the shy girl who had first entered the building. Back at home, Mila carefully placed the ribbon she had been awarded for her painting on her bedside table. Arthur watched from the doorway, a smile tugging at his lips. "Are you proud of yourself?" he asked. Mila nodded. "I think so." "You should be," Arthur said, walking over to sit beside her. "Tonight, you showed everyone how talented and special you are. And this is just the beginning." Mila looked thoughtful. "Do you think I can do more? Like, help people with my art?" Arthur's heart swelled with pride. "I know you can." As the regional exhibition approached, Arthur and Mila worked together to prepare. Mila spent hours in her makeshift studio, painting scenes inspired by her life and the people she cared about. Her creativity seemed boundless, and Arthur marveled at how her art captured emotions in ways words often couldn't. On the day of the exhibition, Mila's new piece, Together We Rise, was unveiled to a large crowd. The painting depicted a group of children of all abilities holding hands in a field of wildflowers, their faces lit with joy. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Applause filled the room and several attendees wiped away tears as they studied the work. A journalist from a regional newspaper approached Mila for an interview. Though nervous, Mila answered their questions with honesty and charm. "Why did you choose to paint this?" the journalist asked. Mila thought for a moment. "Because I think everyone should feel like they belong. And when we're together, we're stronger." The journalist smiled, clearly moved. "That's a beautiful message, Mila. Thank you for sharing your talent with us." The exhibition marked a turning point for Mila. Her art gained recognition, not just for its beauty but for the powerful emotions it conveyed. She began receiving invitations to speak at local schools and events, where she shared her story and encouraged others to embrace differences. Arthur watched with pride as Mila's confidence blossomed. Yet he remained vigilant, knowing that not everyone would celebrate her success. One day, while walking home from school, Mila and Leo encountered a group of older kids who began mocking Mila's paintings, calling them childish and weird. Mila's shoulders sagged, but Leo stepped forward, his voice firm. "Leave her alone," he said, glaring at the bullies. "You don't get to say stuff like that. Mila's art is amazing, and she's braver than any of you." The bullies scoffed but eventually walked away. Mila looked at Leo, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thanks, Leo. That's what friends are for," he said with a grin. When Arthur heard about the incident later, he sat Mila down and reminded her of the impact she was making. "Not everyone will understand your work, Mila," he said. "But that doesn't mean it isn't important. Keep creating, keep sharing your message. The world needs it." Mila nodded, her determination renewed. "I will." As the months passed, Mila continued to grow as both an artist and an advocate. Her paintings became symbols of hope and inclusion, inspiring countless people in Brighthaven and beyond. For Arthur, the greatest joy was watching Mila realize her potential and begin to envision a future where she could make a difference on an even larger scale. And as she sat in her room one evening, sketching ideas for her next piece, Mila whispered to herself, "Maybe one day I can change the world." Arthur, overhearing from the hallway, smiled. He had no doubt she would. The crisp autumn air filled the small living room of Arthur's home, now bustling with scattered papers, acceptance letters, and a calendar filled with marked dates. Mila sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a letter with the insignia of a prestigious university stamped at the top. "I got in," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of joy and disbelief. "They accepted me?" Arthur, seated nearby, let out a laugh of pure pride. "Of course they did. They'd have been foolish not to." Mila's journey to this moment had been anything but ordinary. The letter confirmed her acceptance into St. Clair's University, a renowned institution with a competitive law program. She would be one of the first students with Down syndrome to attend, a milestone that filled her with excitement and apprehension. "They gave me a scholarship," Mila said, reading aloud. "For my art and my essay." Arthur's eyes glistened. "You've earned every bit of this, Mila." Her essay, which had accompanied her application, was a heartfelt account of her life and her determination to advocate for those who, like her, had faced prejudice and misunderstanding. It was titled Different is Beautiful, and it had moved the admissions board to tears. When the day arrived for Mila to leave Brighthaven, the entire town seemed to come out to bid her farewell. Neighbors, friends, and teachers gathered in Arthur's front yard, many holding signs of encouragement. Leo stood at the front of the crowd, grinning but visibly emotional. "You're going to be amazing," he said, pulling Mila into a tight hug. "Don't forget me, okay?" "Never," Mila replied, tears threatening to spill. "You're my best friend." Arthur loaded the last of her bags into the car and stood by her side as she took one last look at the home and town that had shaped her. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Mila nodded. "I think so." As they drove toward the university, Mila alternated between nervous chatter and quiet reflection. Arthur reassured her at every turn, but he could see the weight of the transition settling on her. St. Clair's University was a sprawling campus with historic stone buildings and tree-lined paths. Mila's arrival drew curious glances from students and staff, but she focused on the excitement of beginning this new chapter. Her dorm room was modest but cozy, with a large desk that Arthur had helped her set up with her favorite art supplies. As they unpacked, Arthur placed a framed photo of the two of them on her desk. "So you don't forget where you come from," he said with a smile. Mila hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Arthur. For everything." When it was time for Arthur to leave, he knelt to her level and held her hands. "Mila, this is your time to shine. There will be challenges, but you've faced challenges before and come out stronger. Remember who you are and what you're capable of." Mila nodded, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'll make you proud." "You already have," Arthur said. The first few weeks at St. Clair's were overwhelming. Mila struggled to keep up with the fast-paced lectures and rigorous assignments. Some of her classmates were welcoming, but others were dismissive or patronizing. One afternoon, during a group project meeting, a fellow student, Evelyn, openly questioned Mila's abilities. "Are you sure you can handle this section? It's pretty complex." Mila's cheeks flushed, but she steadied herself. "I can handle it. Just give me the time." Despite Evelyn's doubts, Mila completed her part with precision and depth, earning praise from the professor. It was a small victory, but one that bolstered her confidence. Mila found solace in the university's art studio, where she spent her evenings painting after long days of classes. Her art became a way to process her experiences and express the emotions she often struggled to articulate. One evening, a fellow student, Julian, wandered into the studio and stopped to admire her work. "This is incredible," he said, gesturing to a painting of a lone figure standing against a turbulent sea. "Is it yours?" Mila nodded, hesitant. "It's about feeling small but not giving up." Julian smiled. "It's powerful. You have a real gift." They struck up a conversation, and Mila found in Julian a kindred spirit. He became a steady friend, offering support and encouragement when she needed it most. As the semesters passed, Mila's academic and artistic achievements began to draw attention. Professors marveled at her ability to connect abstract legal concepts to real-life issues, and her paintings were featured in several campus exhibitions. But the journey was not without setbacks. Mila faced moments of exhaustion and doubt, particularly during high-pressure exams. Arthur's regular phone calls became her lifeline, his voice a reminder of the strength she carried within. "You've climbed bigger mountains, Mila," he would say. "This is just another one. And I know you'll reach the top." In her third year, Mila tackled her first major internship at a legal aid clinic. There, she worked with families facing discrimination, helping them navigate the complex legal system. One case, involving a young boy with a learning disability who was denied accommodations at school, struck a chord with her. As Mila presented the case in a mock trial exercise, her passion and empathy captivated the room. Her supervisor, a seasoned lawyer named Ms. Patel, pulled her aside afterward. "Mila, you have something special," Ms. Patel said. "You don't just know the law, you understand people. That's rare and invaluable." The moment reaffirmed Mila's purpose. She wasn't just studying law, she was preparing to use it as a tool for change. At the end of her internship, Mila received an award for her outstanding contributions to the clinic. As she stood on stage to accept it, she thought of Arthur, Leo, and everyone who had supported her along the way. Their belief in her had carried her through the hardest moments. When she returned to her dorm that evening, she called Arthur. "I did it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They gave me an award." Arthur's voice was filled with pride. "I never doubted you for a second. I couldn't have done it without you," Mila said. "You could have," Arthur replied. "But I'm so glad I got to be part of your journey." As Mila prepared for her final year at St. Clair's, she reflected on how far she had come. The shy girl who once sat under a tree at recess had grown into a determined young woman with a clear vision for her future. She was no longer defined by what others saw in her. She was defined by her own strength and purpose. And as she gazed at the painting on her dorm wall, a gift from Arthur titled "Different is Beautiful," Mila whispered to herself, "I'm ready to change the world." The Grand Lecture Hall of St. Clair's University buzzed with anticipation as students filed in for the final moot court competition of the year. Mila sat at the front of the room, her heart racing as she shuffled through her notes. This wasn't just another academic exercise. This was the culmination of years of determination and hard work. Her team's case centered on disability rights, advocating for a child who had been denied access to necessary accommodations at school. Mila had spent weeks preparing her arguments, drawing on both her personal experiences and the legal knowledge she had painstakingly acquired. "You've got this," Julian whispered from beside her. He was her teammate and closest ally at the university, always offering encouragement when she needed it most. Mila nodded, though her palms were clammy. As the opposing team began their opening statement, she closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in the memory of Arthur's words. "You've climbed bigger mountains, Mila." When it was Mila's turn to speak, she stood, smoothing her blazer. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. She began her argument with a calm but firm voice, weaving a compelling narrative that combined legal precedent with human impact. Denying accommodations to a child with disabilities isn't just a violation of the law, it's a denial of their humanity, Mila said, her voice resonating with passion. It tells them they don't belong, that their potential doesn't matter. But I'm here to argue that it does, and it always will. The judges listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. By the time Mila concluded her statement, the room was captivated. Julian grinned as she returned to her seat, whispering, "That was incredible." The competition ended with Mila's team securing victory. As her peers congratulated her, Mila felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This was the first step toward the career she had envisioned for herself, a career dedicated to justice and equality. Graduation came faster than Mila had expected. On a sunny spring afternoon, she stood in her cap and gown, surrounded by classmates and professors. Arthur sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him, Leo waved enthusiastically, now a high school student but just as supportive as ever. When Mila's name was called, the audience erupted into applause. She walked across the stage with her head held high, accepting her degree with tears in her eyes. This wasn't just her achievement, it was a testament to everyone who had believed in her, especially Arthur. After the ceremony, Arthur hugged her tightly. "You did it, Mila," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've turned every challenge into a triumph." "I couldn't have done it without you," Mila replied, her voice trembling. "You never stopped believing in me." "And I never will," Arthur said with a smile. Mila's first job after graduation was at a prominent law firm specializing in disability rights. She quickly earned a reputation as a fierce advocate, taking on cases that others deemed too difficult. Her empathy and determination made her a favorite among clients, many of whom saw her as a beacon of hope. One case in particular stood out. Mila represented a young girl named Sophia who had been excluded from her school's theater program due to her speech impediment. Mila's advocacy extended beyond the courtroom. She visited Sophia's school, speaking to administrators and students about inclusion and the power of seeing beyond limitations. When the case was resolved in Sophia's favor, Mila felt a familiar sense of purpose. Sophia's parents expressed their gratitude, but it was Sophia's hug that stayed with Mila the most. "You're my hero," Sophia said softly. Mila smiled, her eyes shining. "And you're mine." As Mila's career flourished, so did her vision for systemic change. She began to lay the groundwork for a foundation dedicated to supporting children with special needs. The foundation, named the Moreau Initiative in honor of Arthur, aimed to provide legal aid, resources, and advocacy training to families across the country. Arthur, now in his twilight years, watched Mila's progress with awe. One evening, as they sat on the porch of his Brighthaven home, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You've built something remarkable, Mila," he said. "But what's even more remarkable is the way you've touched so many lives." Mila looked out at the sea, the waves shimmering in the moonlight. "It's because of you, Arthur. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Arthur placed a hand on hers. "No, Mila. You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." One of Mila's most significant cases came when she was asked to testify before the state legislature, advocating for a bill that would require schools to provide comprehensive accommodations for students with disabilities. Her testimony was deeply personal, recounting her own struggles and triumphs. "Education is a right, not a privilege," Mila said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Every child deserves the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to contribute to society. We must create a world where differences are celebrated, not dismissed." Her words resonated, and the bill was passed unanimously. It was a landmark victory, one that cemented Mila's place as a leader in the fight for equality. By the time Mila turned 25, the Moreau Initiative had expanded nationwide, helping thousands of families and inspiring countless individuals. Her journey from the shy girl under the tree to a trailblazing lawyer and advocate was a testament to the power of resilience and love. At a gala celebrating the foundation's success, Mila gave a heartfelt speech, dedicating the evening to Arthur. "This foundation exists because one person believed in me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Arthur Moreau taught me that differences make us stronger and that love can transform the world. Everything I do is because of him." Arthur, seated in the audience, wiped his eyes as the crowd erupted into applause. Later that evening, as they walked along the Brighthaven shore, Arthur leaned on Mila's arm, his steps slower than before. "You've done more than I ever dreamed, Mila." Mila looked at him, her expression tender. "Because you showed me how." The stars twinkled above them, the waves lapping gently at the shore. In that moment, Mila felt a profound sense of peace. She had found her purpose and the world was a better place because of it. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case of Clark versus Hillsborough School District reached its final day. Mila, now a seasoned attorney with a reputation for fearlessness, sat at the plaintiff's table beside her client, a teenage boy named Daniel, and his parents. Daniel, who had cerebral palsy, had been denied reasonable accommodations at school, a violation of both his rights and his dignity. Mila glanced at the opposing counsel, her expression calm but unyielding. She had faced her share of daunting adversaries, but this case was deeply personal. It wasn't just about Daniel, it was about every child who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Mila rose to deliver her closing argument. The room fell silent. Your Honor, this case is not just about one school district's failure to comply with the law. It's about a culture that sees accommodations as burdens instead of opportunities. Daniel Clark is a bright, ambitious young man who deserves the same chance to succeed as any of his peers. By denying him access, we are not just failing him, we are failing ourselves as a society. Her voice, steady and impassioned, filled the courtroom. She drew upon her own experiences, weaving in legal precedent and personal conviction. When I was Daniel's age, people told me I didn't belong. They told me I couldn't succeed. But someone believed in me and that belief changed my life. Today we have the chance to do the same for Daniel, and to send a message that every life, every potential, matters. As Mila concluded, there wasn't a sound in the room. Even the opposing counsel seemed momentarily disarmed by her sincerity. The verdict came days later, a unanimous decision in favor of Daniel. The judge's ruling not only required the school district to provide accommodations but also set a precedent for similar cases across the state. When the ruling was announced, Daniel's mother wept with relief. Mila hugged her tightly, her own eyes glistening. Daniel looked up at her from his wheelchair, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Thank you, Ms. Moreau," he said. "You believed in me." Mila knelt beside him. "That's because I know how incredible you are, Daniel. Never forget that." The victory made headlines, further cementing Mila's role as a trailblazer in disability rights advocacy. But with success came challenges. Mila began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, participate in interviews, and advise on policy changes. Balancing her growing responsibilities with her commitment to individual clients became a delicate act. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing case files, Arthur called. "How are you holding up, Mila?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "Busy," she admitted. "But good. It's just a lot sometimes." Arthur chuckled. "You've always taken on more than most people would dare. But remember, even superheroes need rest." Mila smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I'll keep that in mind." Mila's next big challenge came when the Moreau Initiative sought to expand its reach internationally. She traveled to conferences in Europe and Asia, meeting with advocates and lawmakers to share her vision. At a summit in Geneva, she delivered a powerful speech about the importance of global inclusion. "Discrimination knows no borders," Mila said to a packed auditorium. "But neither does hope. Together we can build a world where no child is left behind." The speech earned her a standing ovation, and several countries pledged to adopt more inclusive policies. Back in Brighthaven, Arthur followed Mila's journey with pride and awe. Though his health had begun to decline, he insisted on attending the Foundation's annual gala, where Mila was to receive the Advocate of the Year award. The event was a glittering affair, filled with dignitaries, advocates, and families whose lives had been touched by Mila's work. As she took the stage to accept her award, her gaze found Arthur in the audience. "This award belongs to everyone who has fought for a more inclusive world," Mila began. "But most of all, it belongs to the person who taught me that love and belief can transform lives. Arthur Moreau, this is for you." Arthur's eyes filled with tears as the room erupted into applause. Mila stepped off the stage and made her way to him, kneeling to hug him tightly. "You've made me so proud, Mila," Arthur whispered. "You made it possible," she replied. In the months that followed, Mila faced one of her toughest trials yet. Arthur's health took a turn for the worse. As he was hospitalized, Mila juggled her work with caring for him, spending every moment she could by his side. One evening, as they sat together in his hospital room, Arthur took her hand. "Mila," he said softly, his voice frail but steady. "You've given me a life I never dreamed possible. Watching you grow into the person you are has been my greatest joy." Tears streamed down Mila's face. "And you've given me everything, Arthur. I wouldn't be who I am without you." Arthur smiled weakly. "Then we've both been lucky, haven't we?" Arthur passed peacefully a few weeks later, surrounded by Mila and the people who loved him. His loss left a void in Mila's heart, but she channeled her grief into continuing his legacy. She expanded the Moreau Initiative to include scholarships for aspiring advocates and grants for inclusive education programs. At the inaugural Arthur Moreau Scholarship Ceremony, Mila gave a heartfelt speech. "Arthur believed in the power of love and inclusion to change the world," she said. "Through this scholarship, his belief will live on in every student who dares to dream and fight for what's right." In the years that followed, Mila's work continued to transform lives. Her art, once a personal refuge, became a powerful tool for advocacy, appearing in galleries and campaigns that championed inclusivity. Mila often returned to Brighthaven, visiting the home where her journey began. She would sit on the porch, gazing at the sea, and feel Arthur's presence in the gentle rhythm of the waves. And as she reflected on the life they had built together, Mila knew one thing with certainty. Love and belief had the power to change the world, and she would spend the rest of her life proving it. The small town of Brighthaven was alive with excitement as residents gathered at the newly completed Moreau Center for Advocacy and Inclusion. The building, nestled near the coast, stood as a beacon of hope and progress. Mila, now in her 30s, stood at the entrance, greeting visitors and volunteers who had come to celebrate the center's grand opening. The Moreau Center was a culmination of Mila's vision, a space dedicated to empowering children with special needs, providing legal resources to families, and fostering a community that celebrated diversity. Every corner of the center bore traces of Arthur's influence, from the library filled with books he had once loved to the art gallery featuring Mila's paintings, each telling a story of resilience and inclusion. Leo, now a young adult and one of the center's coordinators, approached Mila with a grin. "We're ready whenever you are." Mila nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of pride and nervousness. She stepped onto the small stage set up in the courtyard, facing a crowd of friends, supporters, and families whose lives had been touched by her work. "Welcome everyone," Mila began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. "Today we celebrate more than just the opening of a building. We celebrate the power of belief, love, and determination to create change." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This center exists because one person believed in me when no one else did. Arthur Moreau didn't just give me a home, he gave me a purpose. And every child, every family we serve here, is a continuation of his legacy." The crowd erupted into applause, but Mila wasn't finished. She gestured toward a plaque near the entrance, engraved with the words Arthur had often told her, "Different is beautiful. Never forget that." "This plaque is a reminder of why we're here," Mila said. "To honor differences, to fight for inclusion, and to ensure that every person knows their worth. Together we'll build a world where no one is left behind." As the crowd stood in ovation, Mila felt the weight of Arthur's presence beside her, his unwavering faith in her etched into every word she spoke. In the months following the center's opening, Mila dedicated herself to its mission. She worked with a team of passionate advocates, artists, and educators to create programs that reached beyond Brighthaven. Families traveled from across the country to seek support, and the center became a model for similar initiatives worldwide. Mila also returned to her art, using it as a medium to tell the stories of the people she helped. Her paintings, now sought after by galleries and collectors, became powerful symbols of inclusion. One piece, titled "The Bridge," depicted children of all abilities holding hands across a rainbow-lit pathway. It hung in the center's main hall, a constant reminder of the community's shared vision. One evening, after a long day of meetings and workshops, Mila sat on the porch of Arthur's old house. The waves crashed gently against the shore, and the stars shone brightly overhead. Leo joined her, bringing 2 mugs of tea. "You've done something incredible here, Mila," Leo said, handing her a mug. "Arthur would be so proud." Mila smiled, her eyes misty. "I hope so. Everything I've done is because of him." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the sound of the sea filling the space between them. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Leo asked. Mila nodded slowly. "I do. There's always more to fight for. More voices to uplift. But for now, I think I'm exactly where I need to be." Leo grinned. "And where you need to be is changing the world." Mila chuckled, shaking her head. "Not alone. With people like you, like everyone at the center, we're doing it together." The years passed and Mila's impact only grew. The Moreau Center expanded to include satellite locations in other cities, each one carrying forward the principles of love, belief, and inclusion that Arthur had instilled in her. Mila's name became synonymous with advocacy and resilience, but she never lost sight of where her journey began. On the 10th anniversary of the center's founding, Mila stood before a new generation of children and families at the annual celebration. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw the reflections of her younger self. Children who had been told they didn't belong, now thriving in a space that celebrated them. "Arthur used to tell me that different is beautiful," Mila said, her voice clear and strong. And he was right. Each of you here today is proof of that. Together, we've shown the world that inclusion isn't just an ideal. It's a reality we can build, one step at a time. As the crowd cheered, Mila felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had come full circle, but her work was far from done. With every child who smiled, every family who found hope, and every life that was changed, Mila knew Arthur's legacy lived on. And as she walked through the center that evening, the stars shining brightly above, Mila whispered a quiet promise to herself: "We're just getting started." As Mila's story reminds us, love and belief can transform not only individual lives but entire communities. Her journey from a girl dismissed by society to a trailblazing advocate challenges us to think about the power of inclusion and perseverance. What about you? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where belief in someone changed the course of their life? How do you think we can create a world where every person, regardless of their differences, feels seen, valued, and supported? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've been inspired by Mila's journey, or perhaps your own experiences with resilience and advocacy. And remember, every small act of kindness can contribute to a more inclusive world. Let's start today.